In the 1890s, Upper Manhattan echoed with the sounds of construction and possibility. Hammers rang against wood as new buildings rose along freshly paved streets. Electric streetcars hummed past rows of elegant brownstones, carrying families who believed they had found their piece of the American dream. Then came the Exodus. White families who had built these neighborhoods began moving further north, leaving behind empty apartments and fading hopes. Real estate values plummeted. Landlords faced a choice: let their properties stand vacant or welcome new tenants who had been excluded from other parts of the city. What followed was not just a change of residence, but a complete transformation of American culture. The neighborhood that had been abandoned would soon become the birthplace of a renaissance that would influence art, music, and literature across the globe. The story of Harlem begins long before it became an icon of Black culture and achievement. In 1658, Dutch settlers established a small farming village they called New Harlem, named after a city in the Netherlands. For more than 2 centuries, this northern Manhattan outpost remained largely rural, a collection of farms and estates separated from the growing metropolis to the south. Everything changed in the 1870s when New York's elevated railway pushed northward. Suddenly, land that had been isolated and primarily agricultural became valuable real estate. Developers saw potential for something unprecedented: a planned suburban community within city limits, offering space and fresh air while remaining connected to downtown by modern transportation. Among these visionaries was David King Jr., a wealthy white developer who purchased large tracts of Harlem land in the 1880s. His vision was clear and exclusive: elegant row houses and apartment buildings designed specifically for upper-middle-class white families seeking escape from the crowded conditions downtown. By the 1890s, King's vision was becoming reality. Harlem was transformed with broad, tree-lined avenues, elegant limestone facades, and modern amenities. Electric streetlights illuminated neighborhoods where gas lamps had recently been the norm. Newly paved roads replaced dirt paths. Theaters and social clubs opened their doors, promising cultural refinement to match the architectural splendor. German, Irish, and Jewish families moved northward in waves, each seeking not just housing but status, the social currency that came with a Harlem address. For these early residents, Harlem represented aspiration realized. Here were spacious apartments with modern plumbing, neighborhoods with proper schools and houses of worship, all connected to Manhattan's economic opportunities via the marvel of rapid transit. The Harlem subway connection, completed in 1904, seemed the final piece in securing the neighborhood's prosperous future. With the IRT subway linking 145th Street directly to downtown, developers doubled down on their investments, certain that demand for housing would only increase as commuting times decreased. But in their rush to capitalize on Harlem's promise, developers made a critical miscalculation. Between 1900 and 1905, speculative building reached fever pitch. Apartment buildings and brownstones multiplied faster than tenants could fill them. The market became saturated, with thousands of vacant units standing empty, monuments to overconfidence. What followed was both economic crisis and demographic revolution. White property values began to plummet. Landlords who had invested fortunes found themselves unable to meet mortgage payments on empty buildings. Meanwhile, white families who had recently arrived began departing for newer developments in the Bronx and Queens, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of abandonment and decline. Into this moment of crisis stepped Philip Peyton Jr., a young black real estate agent born to working-class parents in Massachusetts. Peyton had arrived in New York with little more than determination, working as a handyman and barber before finding his calling in real estate. Where white property owners saw disaster, Peyton recognized opportunity. Black New Yorkers had long been confined to overcrowded, substandard housing in areas like San Juan Hill and the Tenderloin District. Despite having the means to afford better accommodations, they faced systematic exclusion from most residential areas. Peyton's insight was simple yet revolutionary. Harlem's housing crisis could solve two problems simultaneously. Landlords needed tenants, and black families needed homes. In 1904, Peyton founded the Afro-American Realty Company with this mission in mind. His first major success came on West 134th Street, where he convinced a desperate white landlord to lease an entire building to black tenants. The arrangement proved profitable for both parties. The landlord received steady rental income, while black families gained access to quality housing previously denied to them. White property owners formed associations to block this demographic shift, but economic necessity proved stronger than racial prejudice. Building by building, block by block, Harlem began its transformation. By 1908, Peyton's company was managing properties worth millions of dollars, housing thousands of black residents who had never before had access to such neighborhoods. The story of Harlem's transformation cannot be told without honoring those who risked everything to make it possible. Philip Peyton Jr. stands foremost among them, a visionary who recognized possibility where others saw only crisis. Despite achieving remarkable success, Peyton's life ended tragically early. He died in 1917, aged just 41, having lived long enough to see his dream taking shape, but not its full flowering. Among the early settlers were families like the Thomases, who faced harassment, legal challenges, and sometimes violence simply for moving into homes they could afford. James C. Thomas, a postal worker, purchased a brownstone on 135th Street in 1908, making him among the first black homeowners in the area. When white neighbors attempted to invalidate his purchase through legal means, Thomas fought back through the courts, establishing precedents that protected future black homebuyers. Vertner Tandy, the first licensed black architect in New York State, played a crucial role in reshaping Harlem physically. A founding member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, Tandy designed buildings that would house both residences and institutions central to the emerging community. His most famous work, Villa Lewaro, the mansion he designed for Madam C.J. Walker in nearby Irvington, symbolized the heights to which black Americans could aspire. Less visible but equally important were the domestic workers who formed Harlem's backbone. Women who cleaned homes and raised children for white families downtown returned each evening to build their own community uptown. Their modest wages, carefully saved, paid for church donations, children's education, and helped relatives migrate from the South. These women created networks of mutual support, taking in boarders, sharing childcare responsibilities, and passing information about jobs and housing. The Pullman porters, black men who worked on the nation's railways, became informal ambassadors for Harlem across America. As they traveled through southern states, they spread word about opportunities in the North. Many saved their earnings and tips to secure Harlem apartments for themselves, eventually bringing family members north. Through their travels, they connected Harlem to a nationwide network of black communities, facilitating the flow of people, ideas, and culture. What began as a trickle of migration soon became a flood. Between 1910 and 1920, the black population of New York nearly doubled, with much of this growth concentrated in Harlem. The causes were both economic and social. Northern factories needed workers during World War I, while southern states intensified racial violence and oppression following Reconstruction's collapse. The numbers tell a striking story. In 1900, fewer than 500 black residents lived in Harlem. By 1920, that number had exploded to over 73,000. By 1930, Central Harlem was about 70% black. This demographic revolution transformed the neighborhood from an integrated community to one predominantly black, creating what would become America's most famous black urban enclave. This massive population shift created cultural tensions and opportunities. Established black New Yorkers, many with northern roots stretching back generations, sometimes looked askance at southern newcomers with their different speech patterns, religious practices, and social customs. Southern migrants, in turn, found northern black communities sometimes cold and status conscious. Yet, from this cultural collision emerged new forms of expression and community. Churches incorporated Southern gospel traditions into Northern worship styles. Southern cooking traditions blended with Caribbean influences from Harlem's growing West Indian population. Even language evolved, with Southern vernacular mixing with Northern urban speech to create distinctive Harlem expressions. As white residents departed, a parallel black economy emerged. Excluded from downtown department stores as both customers and employees, black entrepreneurs opened their own shops along 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. Beauty parlors, funeral homes, restaurants, and newspapers specifically serving black clientele flourished. What began as necessity, creating services denied elsewhere, became a source of community pride and economic opportunity. The demographic and economic transformation of Harlem laid groundwork for something even more profound, a cultural and intellectual awakening that would change America forever. This Harlem Renaissance didn't emerge suddenly, but grew from seeds planted in the neighborhood's early transition. Intellectual ferment preceded artistic flowering. W.E.B. Du Bois, editing the Crisis magazine from its office on 135th Street, provided a platform for Black writers and political thought. A few blocks away, Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association promoted Black pride and economic self determination, attracting thousands to its meetings at Liberty Hall. The economic realities of Harlem life inadvertently sparked musical innovation. Families struggling with Harlem's high rents hosted rent parties, where guests paid small fees for home cooked food and live music. These intimate gatherings became incubators for jazz experimentation, as pianists like James P. Johnson and Willie the Lion Smith developed the stride piano style that would influence generations of musicians. By the early 1920s, Harlem's nightlife drew visitors from downtown and beyond. The Cotton Club, despite its whites-only admission policy, showcased Black performers like Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway. Small clubs and speakeasies flourished during Prohibition, creating spaces where racial boundaries sometimes temporarily dissolved in the shared appreciation of music and dance. Literary voices found fertile ground in Harlem's intellectual climate. Langston Hughes arrived from the Midwest, finding inspiration in the neighborhood's rhythms and contradictions. Zora Neale Hurston brought anthropological training and Southern folklore to her portrayals of Black life. Countee Cullen, Claude McKay, and Jean Toomer brought diverse perspectives to what became known as the New Negro literary movement. Complex relationships developed between Black artists and white patrons. Wealthy whites like Charlotte Osgood Mason and Carl Van Vechten provided financial support that enabled artistic production while simultaneously shaping which aspects of Black culture received recognition. These patronage relationships offered opportunity, but often came with constraints. Expectations about authentic Black expression that could limit artistic freedom. Behind the cultural brilliance of the Renaissance lay harsh economic realities rarely featured in celebratory accounts. For most Harlem residents, daily life involved struggle against systems designed to extract maximum profit from a captive market. The housing that Philip Payton had helped open to Black residents came at premium prices. Black tenants typically paid 30 to 50% more than white tenants for identical apartments, a color tax imposed, because landlords knew their tenants had few alternatives. Families coped by subdividing apartments and taking in boarders, leading to overcrowding that contributed to health problems including tuberculosis, rates far exceeding city averages. Women bore particular burdens in maintaining Harlem households. Domestic workers might rise before dawn to travel downtown, clean and cook in white homes all day, then return to handle their own family responsibilities. The physical and emotional toll of this double duty remained largely unacknowledged, even as their wages sustained families and institutions. When legitimate economic opportunities proved insufficient, alternative economies emerged. The numbers game, an illegal lottery, became Harlem's most ubiquitous underground business. Numbers runners collected small bets daily throughout the neighborhood, creating an informal banking system that recycled money within the community. Successful numbers bankers like Casper Holstein and Stephanie St. Clair became community benefactors, funding charitable causes and occasionally providing loans unavailable through formal institutions. For many migrants, Harlem represented physical escape from Southern terror, but psychological traumas traveled with them. Families who had witnessed lynchings, experienced violence, or fled under cover of darkness carried these memories northward. Such experiences often went unspoken, but shaped community responses to northern versions of discrimination and danger. The legacy of Harlem's transformation extends far beyond the neighborhood's boundaries. The artistic innovations of the Renaissance permanently altered American culture. Jazz rhythms influence every subsequent musical genre. Literary voices established Black experience as central to American literature rather than peripheral. Intellectual frameworks developed in Harlem salons laid foundations for civil rights movements that would follow. Harlem demonstrated a model of Black community building that inspired similar developments nationwide. Institutions founded during this period, churches, fraternal organizations, political clubs, newspapers, created infrastructure for community advancement that outlasted the Renaissance itself. The idea that Black Americans could create thriving, self sufficient communities despite segregation and discrimination became a powerful example. Yet Harlem's story also reveals the limits of cultural achievement without economic power. Even as the neighborhood produced artistic genius celebrated worldwide, most residents continued struggling against structural barriers to prosperity. The gap between Harlem's cultural influence and the economic reality of its residents raises questions about the relationship between artistic recognition and material progress. Today, these questions remain relevant as Harlem faces new transitions. The neighborhood that once transformed from white to Black now experiences gentrification that threatens to displace longtime residents. Cultural heritage that once seemed at risk of being forgotten now risks being commodified without benefiting those who sustained it through difficult decades. What remains indisputable is the courage of those first families who ventured northward seeking better lives. Their decisions to leave the familiar, to challenge boundaries, to build new communities, created ripples that continue reshaping American culture. In their individual human choices lies the true power of Harlem's story, the reminder that great social transformations begin with simple human desires for home, opportunity, and the freedom to live fully.